Yes, it is true. Sometimes there are bad teams that make the NFL playoffs. January football allows us to watch a variety of good teams such as the Detroit Lions and bad teams such as the Detroit Lions. As Bob Ross put it though, we call these happy little accidents. They deserve some love as well. Normally a video about the NFL's worst playoff teams would include teams with a negative point differential, but that's not specifically what I'm looking for. For this criteria, I'm looking at 15 different teams in the 16 to 17 game eras that went 7-9, 8-8, or 8-9 and made the playoffs, strike-shortened seasons excluded. All 15 of these teams have a story to tell, even if the story is as long as a haiku. So let's get into it with the history of the NFL's worst playoff teams. The first team without a winning record to clinch a playoff spot in a full season played in 1985, and it's the Cleveland Browns. These Browns are headlined by legendary coach Marty Schottenheimer, who was promoted as the team's interim coach the previous season, and they won the AFC Central despite having a losing streak that was longer than any of their winning streaks. Clearly, they needed more time before they can turn into a true contender, but they followed the Schottenheimer recipe with a good defense and solid run game that featured the third 1,000-yard duo in any backfield, outstanding rookie Kevin Mack, and the underappreciated Ernest Byner. The playoff format at the time allowed the division winners to get a first-round bye, so the third-seeded Browns traveled to the Orange Bowl to face the reigning AFC champion Miami Dolphins. So I will spoil it right away, none of the 15 teams in this story will even make the Super Bowl, sorry. But remarkably, it's this Browns team that may have had the best shot at a run. With a ridiculous franchise record-setting day from Byner on the ground, they coasted to a 21-3 lead early in the third quarter. Unfortunately, the gas meter read E and the results for the Browns read L. The Dolphins scored 21 unanswered points and Cleveland could not get into field goal range as time expired. The Dolphins escaped this one 24-21. Rookie quarterback Bernie Kosar, who had played at the Orange Bowl as the starting quarterback for the Miami Hurricanes in college, threw just 8 passes in the second half, and he had no problem letting everyone know he was furious. Eventually, Kosar's frustrations would temper, though, as he spent the rest of the 80s as one of the league's absolute best quarterbacks. While the Browns have endured a number of heartbreaking playoff moments in their post-merger history, this isn't remembered as much because they were a heavy underdog, and their best years were way ahead of them as they would become an AFC powerhouse for the rest of the 80s, making the playoffs in each of the decade's last 4 years with 3 AFC title appearances. Just do me a favor, just don't ask me how they did in those seasons. I wasn't even born for them, so I can't even be emotionally affected by them. Next up, we have the 1990 New Orleans Saints, led by head coach Jim Mora Sr. You know Mr. Jim Mora as that cranky old dude with the funny post-game tirades about poop in the playoffs. Less known is that not only are the Saints experiencing their first literal taste of franchise success under him, but also, he's got a bit of a humble side to him. He'll play down comparisons to Dwight Eisenhower, really? And when one reporter calls him a coaching genius, he simply goes, "No, I'm not." He'll embark on other adventures, such as crying himself to sleep after one overtime loss in 1989, visiting a kid with a broken leg in the hospital, and standing up for his starting quarterback after Saints fans cheered his injury. That's not the Mora people remember today, and all of this is to say he's earned the level of patience it'll take to rebound from this 8-8 season, which, still, marks the Saints' second ever postseason appearance. Their defense is quite talented, featuring Hall of Fame edge rusher Ricky Jackson, Hall of Fame linebacker Sam Mills, future Defensive Player of the Year winner Pat Swilling, who has his own Hall of Fame case to make, and terrific inside linebacker Vaughn Johnson, among others. A middle-of-the-pack team for sure, but a last-second field goal in the regular season finale completed the team's ascent from a 2-5 start to a 6-3 finish, and they became the first wildcard team to make the playoffs without a winning record. As for the offense, its weak point is at quarterback. The options they had resembled guys who would sell you hot dogs on the street, but recently acquired Steve Walsh played the least ineffective, I suppose. The Saints' opening game was at Chicago, where a hit from the Bears' Steve McMichael separated Walsh's throwing shoulder as he was replaced by backup John Forcade, who sounds like he's the founder of 16-Bit Bar and Arcade. Neither Walsh nor Forcade did much in damage to the Bears' defense, and the Saints exited early and quietly 16-6. But maybe they could have taken this one if a blocked field goal return for a game-tying touchdown in the third quarter wasn't taken away by a controversial offsides penalty on New Orleans. Who knows? A rough finish to the season for the Saints, but one followed by 23 combined wins in 1991 and 1992 with obvious playoff appearances, plus 2 consecutive #1 scoring defenses. That doesn't really happen all the time in the NFL, especially not anymore. They'll have to wait until 2000 before their first playoff win, but many Saints fans have looked upon the Mora era fondly for the respect he was able to bring the franchise. We won't have to wait longer than a year for our next team. The 1991 New York Jets. They were one team to lose to the 1-15 Colts and nearly wasted the playoff spot after a 7-5 start. But just like the 90 Saints, they used a last-second game-winning field goal in Week 17, except in overtime in this instance, to clinch a playoff spot at 8-8. Allow me to introduce you to one of the wackiest head coaches to ever fall into obscurity, Bruce Coslett. His most bizarre accomplishment is testifying for longtime friend Michael Blatt. Ready for this? Michael Blatt was a former interim GM for the Seattle Seahawks turned suspect on trial for the alleged slaughter of a business associate by Crossbow? What is going on? Yeah, it's one of the craziest cases I've ever read, and the defensive attorney was actually in the same role for the O.J. Simpson trial as well. Anyway, yeah, Coslett's a pretty interesting guy. He motivates his Jets players by breaking away to Tim Conway specials during film session, and won't let his players talk about losses to bad teams, which, to be fair, they are followed by a pair of 2-game winning streaks, so it clearly works. Coslett's sense of humor is pretty dry as well. When he had a rental car stolen from him, he didn't care nearly as much about its eventual return as he was about the golf clubs in the car being returned. The Jets stopped themselves from golfing for at least another week with a playoff spot, largely thanks to one of the league's top running games featuring Blair Thomas and Brad Baxter, 2 950-yard receivers in Rob Moore and Al Toon, and 5 game-winning drives from veteran quarterback Ken O'Brien. But yeah, that was pretty much all O'Brien had to offer that year, and 3 interceptions against the Oilers in the wild card complicated chances of winning. The Jets had a chance at tying the game late, but an O'Brien rocket slipped through Al Toon's hands in the end zone, and the Jets' next Hail Mary pass was picked off as the Oilers hilariously lateraled the ball after the interception as time expired. The Jets fell into a harsh decline after. Only the inaugural 96 Ravens had a worse win percentage than them over the next 5 seasons, and they wouldn't make the playoffs again until 1998. Now that was a fun season. Take those remotes and let's fast forward all the way to 1999, where we actually have 2 8-8 playoff teams, the Detroit Lions and the Dallas Cowboys. First, the Lions. The abrupt retirement of Hall of Fame running back Barry Sanders just before the season sent shockwaves throughout the organization, but the greater shock was in their starts of 6-2 and 8-4, as they became the first team in NFL history to beat 4 division champs in one season. The Lions head coach is Bobby Ross, a national champion coach at Georgia Tech and AFC champion with the 1994 Chargers. Players generally dislike him from being a stark contrast in personality to their previous coach, Wayne Fontes, but credit to him for at least making this team competitive without the franchise's best ever player. They weren't exactly scraping by bad teams either. They had beaten 5 playoff teams. This included the eventual Super Bowl champion Rams in a game where they needed an absurd 4th and 26 pass conversion to spark a game-winning drive. But starting quarterback Charlie Batch missed 5 games from a broken thumb he suffered against the Rams, one injury out of many for the Lions, and it showed when they lost their last 4 games and were outscored 92-50. Task failed successfully, I guess, because they clinched the playoff spot in Week 16 anyway. Although the Lions were awful in the home stretch, their top 2 receivers weren't, getting a 13-yard season from Jermaine Crowell and 1,100 from Johnny Morton. Morton has to rank as one of the most underrated players in Lions history, and the same is true for official franchise sack leader Robert Porcher, whose career-high 15 sacks were 3rd that season. Next, let's bring up the 99 Cowboys, at the tail end of their glory years in their 1990s dynasty run, and led by future fired head coach Chan Gailey. This team is a little different than the rest because they start off beautifully at 3-0 with 100 combined points before a career-ending injury to Hall of Fame receiver Michael Irvin in Week 5 threw them off the minecarts. The Cowboys generally won their games by blowouts and lost their games in mostly close fashion, but they at least got the last truly great seasons out of Hall of Famers Emmitt Smith and Deion Sanders, and also had one of the league's top defenses. As one of 4 NFC teams to finish with an 8-8 record, Dallas's conference record allowed them to clinch a tiebreaker and playoff spot along with Detroit. Not a shock when I say that both of these teams got maimed early in the first round. The Lions faced the second best scoring offense in the Redskins and made it close, only trailing 27-0 at the end of the first half, before making it closer and losing 27-13. The Cowboys too ran into a buzzsaw in the Vikings, and after an early 10-3 lead, they allowed 24 unanswered points as the same offense criticized for playing too conservative all season generated no points in the last 50 minutes. The Lions followed this up by becoming the NFL's laughingstock in the 2000s before ascending into mostly mediocrity in the 2010s and eventually finding their footing as Super Bowl competitors in the early 2020s. Meanwhile, the Cowboys followed this with 3 consecutive finishes of 5-11. And look, yes, the easy thing to do is clown them for their lack of conference title appearances since 1995. However, as a Browns fan, I'd give anything to have the win percentage Dallas has had since 2000, which is tied for 10th best compared to the Browns' 32nd best. Now let's go to 2004. We've got 2 8-8 playoff teams again, the St. Louis Rams and the Minnesota Vikings. No team had won more games than the Rams had from 1999 to 2003. In 2004, well, they're in this video and I already spoiled their record, so take a guess. In their 5th year under head coach Mike Martz, their ride to the playoffs was far bumpier. They were still getting first-class production from Hall of Fame wide receiver Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt. Why isn't Holt in the Hall of Fame? But the vibes here were not fun ones at all. Martz was unhappy for much of the season at the team's mediocrity. He put blame on players. Hey, that's not unheard of in the NFL. Coaches do this all the time. Also ESPN. Martz blamed ESPN for stirring up player reactions with reports on his job security. Both Martz and the front office denied that his job was in any danger, but at 6-8, playoff hopes were just about done. Then, the Rams were gifted a free win in Week 16 over a resting Eagles team. A win against the Jets in Week 17 and a Vikings loss would make the Rams bound for playoff town. This back-and-forth affair went to overtime tied at 29 apiece. 3 traded possessions later, the Jets had St. Louis staring into the eye crust of death with a 53-yard field goal attempt. The kick sailed wide right, and the Rams needed 5 plays to set up a 31-yarder of their own, a successful playoff clinching game winner. Mike Martz was endlessly proud of his team. Hey Nate, who cares, he says. We're back in the playoffs after a Vikings loss. Which begs the question, why are the Vikings in this video too if a loss puts the Rams in the playoffs? Well, they have their own funny tiebreaker that can allow them to clinch a postseason spot, but we'll get to that later. The 2004 Vikings are coached by the big beef master himself, Mike Tice, and he is having the privilege of supervising the incredible season quarterback Dante Culpepper is having. Culpepper has been one of the true franchise quarterbacks the Vikings have had in their long storied history of successful journeyman signings. And despite receiving the weakest season from Randy Moss in his first stint as a Viking, 13 touchdowns though, had one of the greatest quarterback seasons of the decade. Culpepper set single-season franchise records for passing yardage, passer rating, and touchdown passes, throwing a whopping 39. The problem with the 2004 Vikings, however, is that their defense is terrible. Only one team is allowing more first downs, plus only 2 are allowing more yards per play. That threatens to cost them a playoff spot down the stretch, and a loss to the Redskins in Week 17 allows the Rams to make it into the playoffs. But fear not, because the loss from the 7-8 Panthers to the Saints allowed the land of 10,000 lakes to swim to the postseason. They can thank a historically weak NFC playoff picture for that. Since 1990, we've been in what's been known as the wildcard era of the playoffs, with extra teams added in 1990 and 2020. The average win total for the NFC in 2004 was 9.8, one of just 2 times where this happened in either conference in this era. The other time was also the NFC in 2006, more on that later. So before this point, we've covered 5 8-8 playoff teams and none of them have won a playoff game. That might change with these 2. On January 8th, 2005, the Rams had the chance to become the first NFL team at 500 or worse to win a playoff game in a non-strike shortened season. Their opponent was their NFC West champion rivals, a 9-7 Seahawks team they swept the season series against, and the third time was still the charm here. Tied at 20 with just over 2 minutes to go, a 17-yard touchdown from Mark Bolger to Cam Cleveland for the receiver's first catch of the game bumped it to 27-20 Rams. Matt Hasselbeck and the Seahawks drove down to the Rams' 11, but Hasselbeck was sacked on the ensuing first down. Bobby Ingram got 12 of those yards back on a 3rd and 16, setting up 4th and 4 from the St. Louis 5. Hasselbeck fired to Ingram in the end zone, setting up the game-tying touchdown. Drop. Ball game St. Louis. What a monumental day for mediocrity. Let's make it even more monumental, as the Vikings travel to Lambeau Field to face off against the Packers. What I love about these two is that in each of their first 2 regular season matchups this season, Minnesota lost to Green Bay 34-31. For a third time, they would also score exactly 31. This game is best known for announcer Joe Buck mistakenly thinking Randy Moss actually mooned the Packers crowd after a touchdown, making a call that, in his defense, many years later he has come to regret. Silly Joe, he only pretended to do it, and as a response to Packers fans mooning the Vikings team bus prior. On defense, they forced 4 interceptions off Brett Favre in one of the worst playoff performances of his career, which is saying something. On offense, Culpepper played the game of his life, throwing for 4 touchdowns and finishing with a passer rating just south of 140, connecting with Randy Moss twice, Nate Burleson once, and not former NBA champion and Cleveland Cavalier Mo Williams once. The Vikings ran off nearly 8 minutes of game clock at the end, helping ice the 31-17 win. Congratulations, the second team after the Rams to win a playoff game with a 500 record or worse. The Rams and Vikings would get blown out in the divisional round by the actual good teams in the NFC, but as the first 2 non-winning teams to secure a playoff win, they pushed the envelope for how far an average team can go. A couple years later, they're joined by the 2006 New York Giants. This group, led by bumbling goof quarterback Eli Manning and head coach Tom Coughlin, who has always looked like a wise old tortoise, started out 6-2, but this faded as they lost 6 of their next 7, sitting at 7-8 entering the final week. So here's the bizarre tiebreaker that can get the Giants a playoff spot. Ready? Strength of victory. As long as their opponents finish with a better combined record than the opponents of the Packers, the Giants will get the tiebreaker over Green Bay. Sounds easy. But first, the Giants had to win their game against the Skins. After all, Green Bay would win theirs to finish 8-8. So coming into the final regular season game of his career with 2 touchdown runs on the season, Tiki Barber ran for 3 of them for a career-high 234 yards, setting the Giants' franchise record. The Giants have been around for a century, so they have a rich history with many great players. For Barber to break that record, that's astonishing. The man whose record he broke was Tiki Barber 13 days prior. The Giants narrowly squeaked out a win over Washington, and the teams they needed to win and lose that day won and lost that day. The bizarre strength of victory tiebreaker and playoff spot are theirs. The favored Eagles are their wild card opponent, but despite being heavy underdogs, the Giants played their butts off and even tied it late 20-20 on an Eli Manning touchdown to Plaxico Burress. That's when Jeff Garcia and the Eagles offense chewed up the last 5 minutes of game clock, spitting the Giants into the sky with a game-winning, buzzer-beating 38-yard field goal. In 2007, the Giants would spend much of the regular season trying to fight off job security questions for both Eli and Coughlin. And then they finished the season 10-6, won all 3 of their NFC playoff games on the road, and then beat the greatest regular season team of all time to win the franchise's 3rd ever Super Bowl trophy. You see, 8-8 playoff teams can eventually prosper into something greater, and that's exactly what our next team will try to do. The 2008 San Diego Superchargers became the first NFL team to secure a playoff spot after starting a season 4-8, doing so by taking the AFC West title from the Broncos in one of the NFL's biggest season finale blowouts of all time. They're head coached by Mr. Happy to Be Here himself in Norv Turner and quarterback by Phillip Rivers, who finished his career with 8 Pro Bowls and 10 kids. If the Chargers managed to get a couple more wins with Rivers' outstanding production, there's a chance he could have taken MVP from Colts quarterback Peyton Manning. Hey, speaking of, that's their opponent in the wild card. The host Chargers were a Colts first down away from staying home before a sack from Tim Dobbins on Manning forced Indianapolis to punt. From there, the Chargers quickly got in the Colts' territory and used an easy Nate Kading field goal to force overtime. After winning the coin toss, the Chargers drove into Colts' territory again and drove off with a game-winning touchdown from Darren Sproles, who had one of the greatest all-purpose days in playoff history. The eventual Lombardi Trophy winners, the Steelers, would throw them out of the playoffs in the divisional round, but the sudden December rally seemed to awaken a beast in the following 2009, where the Chargers would finish 13-3 and get an AFC second seed. After becoming the first non-winning playoff team to win a postseason game 6 years prior, it was now time for the Rams to do it again in 2010. Just kidding, it's actually the Seattle Seahawks, whose win over the Rams in Week 17 allowed them to clinch the NFC West. Pretty good for the first year of your rebuild under first-year coach and master of pranks Pete Carroll. Up to now, we've had many A-Night teams clinch the playoffs in this story, but for the first time, we now have a 7-9 playoff team. Pop quiz! Bet you weren't expecting one of these, but phones down, eyes on paper. It's time to test your football knowledge. Question 1 of 1. What is the worst point differential any playoff team has ever had? Is it A, the 2004 Rams, B, the 2006 Giants, or the correct answer, the 2010 Seahawks? Their point differential of -97 is by far the worst from a postseason team dating back to the very beginning. All they have to do now is face the wrath of the defending champion Saints, 10-point visiting favorites. But this is a more vulnerable New Orleans team, as future Hall of Fame quarterback Drew Brees has tossed 22 interceptions and their run game is pretty limited. Matt Hasselbeck, who just finished the worst regular season of his legendary Seahawks career, threw 4 touchdowns in his finest playoff hour, leading Seattle out of a 17-7 deficit with a 27-3 stretch. 10 unanswered points are scored by the Saints, soon followed by an exchange of punts. As running back Marshawn Lynch was stuffed for no gain on the first down run, it looked like New Orleans had finally solved the Seahawks riddle. And that is where the Seahawks took a detour. The following second down carry is like something out of a John Wick film. Marshawn Lynch takes on all 11 men on the Saints defense and takes all of them out with a 67-yard touchdown run, widely accepted as one of the NFL's greatest. Quest Field isn't just going crazy, they're causing a minor earthquake. Let me say that again. A touchdown run is causing mankind to move the actual earth by screaming. Thus, the run from Lynch was nicknamed Beastquake. The Saints would score one last time afterwards, but this was the dagger that allowed Seattle to become the first sub-500 team in a full season to win a playoff game. Even though they would be defeated by the Bears a week later, this shocking run kicked off their franchise's greatest era. After missing the playoffs in 2011, they made it back in 7 of their next 8 seasons, making 2 Super Bowls and winning 1 of them. The team they won it all against in 2013 pops up in this video 2 years in the past. The 2011 Denver Broncos, led by head coach John Fox and second-year quarterback Tim Tebow. Tebow was a former Heisman and championship winner with the Florida Gators in college, but in this season his accuracy was historically horrible. Let me tell you a little secret. It's near impossible to complete less than 50% of your passes with a large enough season in the 21st century, but 3 quarterbacks have managed to do it. Anthony Richardson in 2024, Achilles Smith in 2000, Tim Tebow in 2011. The 46.5 completion percentage is the second lowest in this time span from any quarterback that's thrown at least 250 passes in a season. But he's also left-handed. As the 33rd left-handed passer in NFL history, we must cherish any southpaws we get, even if accuracy-wise they can't punch themselves if their fist was taped to their head. Something happens to the 2011 Broncos despite all of this. Tebow is playing terrible football in the first 3 quarters and suddenly dials it up in the 4th quarter. They're making comebacks from down 15-0, 13-10 twice, 29-21, and 10-0 to win games, as Tebow Mania, as it's called, becomes a thing, and a 2-5 start becomes 8-5. Tebow is awful in each of the following 3 losses from Denver, who finishes 8-8 and ties with the division rival Chargers and Raiders. But by using our tiebreaker of the day, superior record over common opponents, they are able to buy the AFC West title, hosting the top scoring defense, albeit a heavily injured one, in the Steelers. Denver is leading this one late on the strength of 20 second quarter points, but a 2-play swing cost them their 7-point cushion when Champ Bailey cannot haul in an interception on a deep bomb to Mike Wallace, before they go deep again on a successful Ben Roethlisberger to Jericho Cotchery 31-yard touchdown. As the Steelers are close to kicking the game-winning 3-pointer, the Broncos pass rush steps up with 2 late sacks to end that possibility and force overtime. So, the Broncos get the ball to start OT, but only get 1 play. The target is the late great Demaryius Thomas, one of the greatest receivers in team history and one of the best of the 2010s. Tebow's slow throwing motion has been widely ridiculed, and it remains slow here, but it's on target to Thomas. Steelers defenders desperately try to chase him down, but Thomas wins a close 100-yard dash with an 80-yard game winner that gets him to 204 yards. It's the only time in playoff history where a receiver with exactly 4 catches has ever reached 200. For Tebow, a devout Christian, he finishes with 2 touchdowns and a passing yardage total of 316. Of course, connections were made in regards to the Bible verse John 3:16. It was as if Tebow played the part of Moses and the broken down steel curtain opened the Red Sea for Demaryius Thomas. Football just continues to astound us in many ways. 1 week later, the Broncos got smoked at New England in the divisional round, and that was Tebow's last sermon as a starting quarterback in the NFL. General manager and former legendary Broncos quarterback John Elway was not pleased with the team's ceiling under their young signal caller and opted to trade Tebow to the Jets and replace him with free agent quarterback Peyton Manning. Denver would go on to make 2 Super Bowls in the next 4 seasons, winning the second one in 2015. And Tebow would make various ventures as a minor league baseball player and even a tight end 6 years after his last NFL appearance. Was his NFL tenure mostly bad? Yeah. Sloppy? For sure. But was it exciting? You bet. Have you noticed a streak going on? 5 of the last 6 teams we've discussed have at least won a playoff game. With the 2014 Panthers, let's make that 6 out of 7. A pretty lackluster offense caused by injuries to Cam Newton, which included a car accident, forced Carolina to trot out to a record of 3 wins, 8 losses, and a tie. This won't be the last time head coach Ron Rivera shows up in this video, but it will be the first. The NFC South race is somehow the worst one yet. So the Panthers are able to win their last 4 games and steal the division crown from the Falcons in the last game, a brutal 34-3 blowout. Their first playoff opponent is the Cardinals, who are on their 4th starting quarterback and in this game put up 78 total yards of offense. That, my friends, is the fewest in a playoff game in a league that has seen 31 postseason teams get shut out. Somehow the Cardinals scored 16, but the Panthers are able to win this one anyway. That's as far as they go when they get steamrolled by the Seahawks, but they leave coincidentally joining that franchise as the second sub-500 team to win a playoff game. Almost fully healthy in 2015, Cam Newton won MVP in 2015, led the Panthers to a 15-1 season, and made it all the way to the Super Bowl. They didn't win it, but they made it there. You can't say they didn't. It's as if many of these teams have to be initiated in a rite of passage. You want to make it to the Super Bowl or go on a deep playoff run? Fine, but you better make the playoffs with 7 to 8 wins before you can do that. Then we'll talk championship. It'll be 6 years before our next team comes along. And for a third time, we've got 2 of them. The Chicago Bears are 2 years removed from their last playoff spot, and they embark on one of the strangest seasons of the 15 teams featured. They're winning games on accident, extending their hands and levitating to a 5-1 start. This includes a freakish comeback down 26-10 against the Falcons in Week 3, where they scored 20 points in the final 6.5 minutes to rob Atlanta blind of victory. Then their season throws up as they regurgitate a 6-game losing streak to go to 5-7. As Coach Matt Nagy's job security is being drawn near the alluring succubus-level flames, the Bears win their next 3 games to move to 8-7. A loss in the final game to the Packers puts them at 8-8, but they got the newly introduced 7 seed and the rare playoff spot from a team with a 6-game losing streak by getting this tiebreaker over the fellow 8-8 Cardinals, the common opponent tiebreaker. To be honest, of the teams I've talked about, the 2020 Bears feel the least like a playoff team, and by getting tossed aside by the Saints in the wild card round, you would never know that they were there. But I will always have a soft spot for this crazy 2020 team. In their own way, they were a blast to watch. Even if you're not necessarily a good team, in football, a chaotic team is always welcome. Let's stay put as we discover the Washington football team. I've always kind of liked this name. In no way does it sound like a 21st century football franchise, but it kind of goes hard, so I will accept it. Hey, look who it is, Ron Rivera, the head coach, which means we are getting our second Riverboat Ron coach sub 500 playoff team. Washington pants and sweats to a 1-5 start that then spirals further to 2-7. But the promotion of starting quarterback Alex Smith, who 2 years prior nearly lost his life with an infected leg caused by a career-altering injury, coincided with the team's 4-game winning streak. Smith misses the Seahawks and Panthers games, both losses, but makes his return for the Week 17 finale against the Eagles. Washington must win in order to prevent the 6-10 Giants from officially becoming the worst playoff team without any contest. They do so 20-14 as Alex Smith, unable to play the following week, leaves the NFL for good after a 16-year career and the greatest comeback story of all time. The Tom Brady Buccaneers play the role of road team, and Washington spoils the 10-point spread by only losing by 8. Their efforts are commendable. Taylor Heineke throws for over 300 yards with 2 total touchdowns, and they've given the Buccaneers perhaps the toughest fight they will receive in the postseason. The football team, now the Commanders, will have to wait until 2024 for the next playoff berth and their first winning season since 2015. For the Buccaneers, they ran the table as the visitor for all 3 NFC games and gave the Patrick Mahomes Chiefs their only Super Bowl loss, helping Brady earn his 7th and final championship ring. Hey, wouldn't you know it, that's our last destination. The last team is the 2022 Buccaneers of the 17-game era. Tom Brady decided to hang it up after 2021 and retired from the NFL after 22 seasons. That didn't even last 2 months before he unretired to run it back. Head coach Todd Bowles was promoted by the retiring Bruce Arians, and he'll be criticized throughout the season for his conservative approach in closeout games. Brady himself still had some juice in those included batteries, but he was lacking the explosive efficiency we had come to expect from him. What he did have, however, was the biggest single-season workload from any quarterback ever, setting new records with 490 pass completions and an absurd pass attempt total of 733. And he was still able to help Mike Evans eat on his way to over 1,000 yards. The first receiver ever to start his career with 9 straight quadruple-digit seasons. Not far behind was the terrific Chris Godwin, a fellow 1,000-yarder. These are the 3 machine parts that keep the Bucs going, but they were scooting by their opponents by the thinnest of scores and leaving them at 7-8 after 15 games and in need of a Week 16 win against the 6-9 Panthers to clinch the NFC South. Thanks to the 3 Tom Brady, Mike Evans touchdowns on the exact same play, that's just what they did. With nothing to play for, the Bucs rested their starters in the final game, a loss to the Falcons, to finish 8-9, and as of this writing, they are the most recent playoff team with a losing record. If you were expecting Tom Brady to unleash the wrath of 1,000 touchdowns on the Cowboys in the wildcard round, you were in for disappointment. The Bucs defense had no answers for Dak Prescott and his 5 total touchdowns, and by the time they finally put points on the board, it was already too late. The Bucs fell 31-14, and Brady left the NFL for good this time, with his last touchdown going to tight end Cameron Brate, and his last pass being a completed 2-point conversion to none other than Mike Evans. Brady's Bucs legacy was already cemented with that Super Bowl run in 2020, and Tampa Bay's remained a competitive bunch past his retirement these last 2 seasons under the incredibly fun renaissance of new starter Baker Mayfield. And there you have it. These 15 teams are some of the weirdest to ever walk this earth and come together to play football. None of these teams made it to a Super Bowl or even a conference title, but some eventually did years later. In fact, 9 of these 15 teams, 60%, saw their records improve the next season. So again, just because by record these are the worst playoff teams ever, that doesn't mean the work always stopped there. So the next time you see a team with a 500 record or worse make the playoffs, it just might be a building block for a season far greater. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to see more videos like this one. Also check out the video and playlist I put right here as well. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.